That's one small step for man.
AI rebels face.
Giant leap for mankind.
Hello, everybody, and welcome again to another episode of the AI Rebels podcast. As always, I am your co-host, Spencer.
And I'm your co-host, Jacob. And we are very excited to welcome Jim Liddle on the show with us today. Thanks for coming on, Jim.
No problem. Happy to be here.
Jim he's the CIO of Nasuni, which is the company I actually recently joined. So I have been very much looking forward to this. I've heard your name, Jim, since I started at Nasuni. Everyone talks about how you're forward-looking, you're so involved in the AI space. I've heard things like thought leader thrown around, which is always impressive.
Big one.
Yeah.
Yeah, don't believe everything you hear. That's all I would say.
All right. I believe it, though. I believe it. Jim, tell us a little bit about yourself, your journey to where you are now in the AI space. We'd love to get a little taste for where you've been.
Sure. So, I'll tell you a little bit about the journey, because I think the journey is kind of interesting, especially for folks who are a little bit younger than me. So I'm originally from the northeast of England. I think, as I said to you two guys before we start the podcast, I actually happen to be in the northeast of England right now for the first time for a little while, because my parents are still here. But I now live in London. I guess my journey, I've been in the industry about 30 years. And I've been predominantly in the IT industry for 30 years. So I actually started off way back in the day doing kind of system admin work. Now what we would call DevOps, I guess. But that was with kind of Novell Networks, Novell Directory Services, Sun Networks, Unix Ultrix. So Windows NT 351 as it was back then. So it was really administering a heterogeneous system, and also doing like some interesting other things, which included implementing a cross-company digital telephone network, putting in fiber optic cables as a backbone so that we could all have kind of Ethernet, which it was at the time, to the desk, doing some early implementations of Wi-Fi, because Wi-Fi wasn't a big thing, back then, and also doing FTP door stacks so we could open the doors with our cards.
Oh, wow.
Kind of a early implementation of kind of Internet of Things type of thing.
Okay.
So that was kind of where I originally started from. And, from there I worked for, quite a few tech companies, a lot of American startups, a lot of European startups. I think back in late 90s, early 2000s, I was working for a company that did, business process and business rules, which was, kind of doing, I guess, some early forays into, what we see today as business process automation and agents, except it was more business rules and business process in YAML, but obviously not autonomous, but trying to achieve kind of the same things we're trying to achieve today, which is to be able to automate discrete business processes inside of an enterprise. And back then, we were describing business processes in WFML, and we were actually doing the business process language in another, ML. And the idea being that you could map the business processes out end to end and then decompose them until you got to atomics and start to implement business rules, and then actually run those in an engine end to end. So it should sound kind of familiar if you're familiar with agents and, except the difference is, of course, that was all static implementations, and today it's all, potentially all autonomous. However, it does kind of smack of the industry trying to solve that problem for a long, long time.
Yeah, definitely.
And we kind of, here we are 25 years later trying to attack the same thing. I think from actually working for some of these companies, I worked for another big data company. Coming out of that, I actually had I've had a couple of attempts at startups, to be honest with you. This one, another one that was bought by Nasuni, was my third startup. I guess you could call it the successful startup.
The one.
And that was, it was an interesting experience, for me, because it's not just been involved in technology. It's, raising the capital, working with investors. And in that particular startup, I've been CEO, CTO, VP sales, chairman. You wear a lot of hats. So my career is, it's been a long career. A lot of it has been based around data, mostly unstructured data, to be honest with you, rather than structured data. Although the work I was doing with a big data company in Hadoop was more around the structured data sets. And now, as you said, at Nasuni, I'm what's termed the Chief Innovation Officer. So that role basically has me, looking at technologies that may be applicable to what customers want to do with their data, but also working with customers on, what their data strategies are as it pertains to Nasuni and unstructured data as they kind of start to investigate AI.
It's so true what you said about we're still trying to solve the same problems that we have been for forever. My own dad had a data startup as well, but his was focused on, again, unstructured data, but specifically unstructured data in the context of compliance, right? And it's just always
it's still a big problem today.
No, exactly.
Yeah,
I was going to say is it's always shocking to me just how, maybe not shocking anymore, but it's insane how deep the problem goes and how hard of a problem it is.
I was talking, I think I said to you both earlier, I've been on a couple of podcasts this week, and one of them was actually talking about compliance and the fact that, why have we never solved the compliance problem with unstructured data? Particularly when things like GDPR and CCPA and HIPAA and all of these compliance regimes would make you think that compliance and governance with unstructured data, we've done that, solved it, it's been put in a box. And then, we come to AI and then we hit the thorny issue of PHI and PAI in data sets that you would kind of expect not to be there by now.
Right.
Yeah. This just touches on also the bigger problem that I think we're seeing so much. We've had guests on from all walks, from startup to very successful and everything in between.
Single person entrepreneurs.
And honestly, data is almost the hardest part of the AI and the integration. They can build an AI tool. They can spin up an AI tool all day long. It's just, how do we then digest the data and actually use it?
Totally true. I think, and there's different elements, obviously, of working with unstructured data. I think one of the elements is, obviously, you've got the metadata pieces of unstructured data, and then you've got the content pieces of unstructured data, and then you've got the schema formats of the metadata and the content pieces of unstructured data. And some of those schema formats are understood, but some of those schema formats are understood but proprietary and actually non-consumable by AI tools today. And that becomes problematic for the enterprise because not all of their data sets, in fact, maybe not even half the data sets, are actually in just unstructured textual data. They're in images, which is kind of getting better because now we've got multimodality and that piece is becoming better, but only candidly in the last 12 months. And even then, probably really in the last 6 months. And then we've got proprietary data sets that they use a lot of, Adobe Premiere, all of the AEC, the Revits and the AutoCADs, and, where it's very difficult to get the data out of those because the actually metadata schemes themselves are proprietary to the companies. And the LLM tools, obviously, they don't take that data out. And that's problematic because when you start to look at it in an industry perspective, so you've got some text documents, you've got some images, but they go hand in hand with this other data that's in the same directory. And actually, just as we always say with AI data, you need the context of the entire data set to get context. So if you're only taking a couple of pieces of it and you can't read the data in the other pieces, then that itself is giving you a shallow view of the data. And then you've got scale. Scale is a big issue with data. If you start to look at retrieval augmented generation, I see so many retrieval augmented generation kind of examples at 10,000 files, 5,000 files, 100,000 files. Okay, what about 1 billion files?
Right.
What about 100 million files? Because the customers we have inside of Nasuni, that doesn't even touch the sides. When you're dealing with multi-petabytes, you're dealing with millions to billions of files. And actually, anybody who's listened to this, who's implemented any RAG architectures, whatever flavor of RAG it is, whether it's, I would say, normalized RAG, knowledge RAG, agentic RAG, they will know the pain points that you have to go through to get qualitative answers from large RAG data sets. And we still, candidly, haven't nailed that today.
I was going to say that I've seen some studies and some, personal reports from people I know that they have started just moving towards just stuffing everything into context and then asking the question. Because they find that...
Even that, if you see some of the recent studies, even putting everything into context, which actually is very difficult to do anyway, because
right, exactly. They has the
because at some point data is going to be bigger than the context window. Even if you do that, you will see that there's a sliding scale. You might have seen some of these studies already that came out recently. There's a sliding scale when the context window gets to a certain size, that actually the quality starts to go down again.
Right, exactly.
Mhm.
Yeah. And then there's also the problem of within the context, it will sort of selectively forget parts of it
Yeah.
in the process of inference. That's another result that I've seen. And it's, I don't know what's going to happen to solve it, but
Well, I think what I'm starting to see
yeah.
is agentic RAG. Actually, if you think about agentic RAG and you think about some of the issues you have with, I would say vanilla RAG, some of the issues are that obviously when you're doing the embedding to the vectorization and the chunking of the data, everybody's used RAG knows that depending on the size of those chunks and the metadata attached, kind of depends on the quality you get. So people start to have strategies of re-ranking, reducing the size of the chunks, looking at the context windows, etc. But still, if the data set is large, you could end up with 10,000 matches, 50,000 matches, all kind of equally ranked. And even if you run them through a re-ranker, you might still end up with 10,000 matches. However, if you look at what I'm starting to see, at least with some of the agentic RAG examples we've seen, and particularly when you see people like, actually a lot of the foundational vendors are already doing this underneath the hood. What they're actually doing is they're taking your prompt and then they have a kind of an orchestrator agent, if you like, and then underneath the hood, they're splitting the prompt into parts and they're farming it out to some of those different agents.
Interesting.
To go where, and that's interesting because each of those agents has its own context window.
Yeah.
So you can start to see, that depending on what the input prompt is, depending on what the data set from a RAG perspective is in the background, you could actually start to see that, well, actually, I might have 10 agents, but they're all targeting a specific section of the data set, which is going to give me better qualitative results, when it's been, vectorized, embedded, chunked, and brought back into. So I start to see some of the patterns like that, and they look interesting, actually.
Yeah. An agentic approach is interesting to me because it's funny how often, I feel like we say this every episode, but the best practices we see in organizations and digesting data and using data, like you need a team with specializations and how to identify various trends in the data, things like this. And slowly AI has morphed to become, okay, now let's use agents to build a team. And people are just blown away that oh my gosh, an agentic approach. This is the same thing we're doing. We're just now applying it to AI, to these agents.
Well, it's interesting because you've just brought to my mind something I read on Reddit today. So the agents subreddit on Reddit.
It's always good.
Yeah, it's good. And I read somewhere today that somebody's got a solo entrepreneur, and they have all of their employees are agents. So they've got a media agent who's responsible for posting things on Twitter and Mastodon and all those things. And they've got another agent who writes copy, for example. And it just amused me because they'd kind of shown you from their terminal, and they'd named all the agents as worker agents, but specifically the action that they were performing, and that was their employee list.
Yeah, it's we had a guest on who talked about this phenomenon, and he said he's like, I would not be shocked if not too long in the future someone was able to come to a company and say, hey, I have cloned your HR department with agents, pay me, and I can do your whole HR department for this monthly fee. It's like it's going to become this poaching entire departments where you can.
Yeah, I think that's true. I mean, if you look at the way that some of the virtual employee startups are targeting that, they're asking you to employ their agents. I mean, that's kind of their terminology. So not hiring people, but hiring agents. I would give the caveat around this. Well, although the technology is exciting, it's still immature.
Very.
And you only need to look at some of the things that have happened even in the last few weeks. You probably saw the, what allegedly happened with Replit and the agent. Did you see that?
Yeah, I did see this one.
The database got deleted, etc.
Oh,
and then
yes,
the Amazon queue, where somebody was able to inject something that the agent, etc. So I think that one of the things that it surfaced is one, immaturity, of that whole ecosystem, because it is relatively still immature, and two, there are new attack surfaces that are starting to, or attack vectors that are starting to open up. Not only misbehaving agents, but also supply chain attacks, and like we saw things of that nature.
What
It's
I've been waiting for is someone to manage to host an LLM on their website in a way that allows arbitrary script execution, and they're going to manage to commit like a cross-site scripting attack against themselves with an LLM.
interesting.
I'm convinced it's going to happen. I'm keeping my eye on it because I guarantee there's going to
Interesting.
be, with the rise of generative UI specifically, there's going to be someone who implements it in a really dumb way, and I'm really excited to see who it is.
I guess, did you see the MCP attacks through Chrome?
Yes, exactly.
I didn't see.
The ones that
What was that
Simon
one?
Willison. Did you read his post about it? Anyways, yeah. So basically, I'm blanking on the details right now, Jim. Maybe you.
Yeah. So basically, I mean, most people are running like Llama and MCPs or Claude and MCPs.
Right.
A lot of the devs are running that on their laptop. If you run that on your laptop, like, you're running it on something like port 3000 and it's open and it's like kind of a web server waiting to get a request. If you, somebody actually managed to surreptitiously put in the Chrome plugin a check in the background to see whether anything was listening on port 3000 and then check to see if it was an MCP file system and then start to give it commands.
Oh my gosh.
And of course, you didn't know anything about this because it's all happening in the background,
Yeah.
And of course, it's just a web server, and you're in a browser, so it can leverage it. And the security company, found several of those that had been, were actually active in the Chrome Web Stack.
Interesting. Oh, that's a little scary.
Well, and it is, and this brings me back to a topic about, obviously dear to my heart because of what we do in Nasuni, which is around AI data resilience. We talk about ransomware resilience a lot. But because of these new attack vectors that are surfacing, I honestly think we'll start to see this AI data resilience term because without a shadow of a doubt, you'll see whether it's misbehaving, whether it's an error because of the way you've written the prompt, whether it's an actual attack. You'll see that on some of these multi-step processes, a lot of the data that you'll be leveraging will be from the file system because that's where your operational data is. So if your file system suddenly becomes either directly or inadvertently attacked, you're going to want to be able to get the data back, really quick. And the reason is it's going to be locked into like now an agentic business process that's going to be in your front office or back office value chain. So it's just going to run, and at some point you'll have forgotten about it. So the point it stops and the data is corrupted, you don't want to be running around like a headless chicken trying to figure out how to get the business process back online and how to get the data back. And at that point, you really need to be able to go back to the immutable copy and then just flick the pointer, get the data back, go and figure out what the problem was in the first place, but get it back on the line and running.
Yeah, I'd love to hear more about what you mean exactly by AI data resilience too. I guess beyond what we just discussed.
It means that your data that is being used with AI, ultimately, it's resilient in the sense that your perimeter security and your underlying security at each threat level is able to provide you with data resilience and quick data recovery. Obviously, there's more than the file system to take into account when you're thinking about that. But as I say, a large proportion of some of those multi-step processes are going to target operational data, and that's going to be on the file system. Why is it going to be operational data? Because just like any data, yes, it's going to be taking CRM and ERP data, but often, again, that example I gave earlier around the context of these linking of data sets for relevance, a lot of it's only going to be relevance if you can actually target up-to-date operational data. And a lot of that's going to reside on the file system. So being able to make sure that you can get back to a point in time, where the data actually was clean, and you want to be able to do that quickly, at speed. Like, take a look at what happened with Replit. Like, was the guy able to get back to the fact that his production database, which had been wiped, could he get back to a copy quickly? And if so, how quickly? That would be an example of AI data resilience.
Interesting. Which becomes more and more important as AI becomes more and more autonomous, I think.
Well, it's the autonomy that scares, I think, is scary. And I'm sure you've had, a lot of people on the podcast talking about the guardrails that you have to put in place,
right?
Et cetera. And I would say, data resilience is just one of those guardrails, along with, how you construct your prompts, etc.
So how would you? I mean, obviously, you are in this space. Nasuni deals with data. You have dealt with it for a long time. For companies looking to implement and become more AI data resilient, what would you tell them? How would you do that?
Well, I think that that's wrapped into what their data strategy is. We talked about it at the very beginning of the podcast, that actually it's really all about the data. AI success is really all about the data, and it's not just about the data; it's about the architecture of where the data sits.
Right.
And one of the issues around that I see with companies, and I'll round trip back to your question. One of the issues I see is that a lot of companies haven't put. I'll give you a classic example. If you look at most enterprise companies, they have more than one location. In fact, they'll probably have several locations. Now, those several locations might be geographically dispersed, or they might be just, for example, within the United States, but they'll have several of them. And in the past, to facilitate people working at those locations, they'll have probably had on-premise storage, because that's what everybody did. Whether that's Windows filers or whether that's NAS doesn't really matter. Maybe it's a combination of both, because that's what a lot of companies, historically have had. But those types of infrastructures and architectures were designed for people. They weren't designed for AI. They were designed to accommodate the fact that data has gravity at certain locations, and applications that are on-premise need access to the data at speed. Therefore, you put the data where the applications are. So you see that everywhere, and we all recognize that kind of pattern. However, even pre-AI, that pattern had issues. All right, so you're an architecture firm, you've got a data set for a project, and you have teams in different locations that specialize in different parts of that project. How do you get them all working on the same data set at the same time when you've got three separate siloed infrastructures from a data perspective? And we all know that, in the past, companies have tried to do things like, Microsoft DFS. They've tried to do replication to keep the data sets in sync overnight, or, they've tried to send each other stuff and then all sorts of stuff to try and concurrently, collaboratively work on a data set. So that's always been a problem. But when you shift it forwards towards AI, you see the issue that actually we've got different parts of our project and different parts of our business have the data scattered among 7 entities. So how do we give AI context, to make sure that it's looking at the entire data set when we're asking questions about our business?
Yeah.
And actually, how do we do that so it's kind of easy? I don't want to be having to do that and have to think about how I get all of the data back to one place on some sort of integration project, because that's going to get worse over time, and it's something I'm going to have to maintain. And then, getting round tripping back to like data resilience, that's kind of all baked in for me. You want to implement an architecture that doesn't have any gaps. And what I mean by that is, I think when you're dealing with data, if you have to separately back the data up and think about backing the data up, then you have a gap in your architecture about how the data is being persisted in the first place and what you do when you kind of change the data. So if you have to think, oh, well, I need to back up all my 7 locations and I need to keep doing that over time, or I've just exceeded my weekend backup window, I'm going to have to do a monthly backup window and maybe do it, over a bank holiday or something, or public holiday, something of that nature. What you really want to happen is every time there's a change, there's a snapshot and it's immutable and you can get back to it. And what you really want is every time somebody, implements a new order or a new change in Office A, Office B and C can see it immediately, almost, as soon as the lock's released. And so can the AI, because it's available to that too. And that's the sort of data architecture, particularly from a file data perspective. I would argue that's the type of data architecture you want for 2025.
Yeah, I think that we'll see, probably not Git specifically, but I think that we'll start seeing a lot more version control software for things beyond code that focus on a Git style interface.
You being a developer must look at that and think, oh, we've been doing that for years. Like,
yeah, but then I think about trying to apply that to a Git tree to petabytes of data. And I'm glad that's not my problem to solve.
I'm old enough to remember working with multi-offices trying to resolve per-force conflicts. So
yeah, it's insane the scale that is out there as far as data goes.
Yeah. And listen, obviously, Jacob and I work for Nasuni, and that's one of the fundamental problems we solve, which
Mhm.
is
Right.
which is architect the data in such a way that actually it's easy to have different data sets be kept in sync between different offices. It's easy to get a single namespace. You don't have to worry about backup because it's all intrinsically built in. But whether you use Nasuni or whether you use something else, my argument would remain the same. That's the type of data architecture you really want to underpin your AI strategy. Because at that point, you can really start building, your AI house with solid foundations.
Right.
Right. Yeah. Going back to my little Git example, I cannot tell you how many times I've been coding and been lazy about the way I'm directing the AI, and I get into a point where like the entire app breaks, and it's so nice to just hit Git reset to
Yeah,
the
absolutely.
last commit that I want, and all that history is
Yeah.
gone, and I have a clean slate. And I
And
wish
by the way,
for
that analogy
more
is
people
no
to
different.
know that.
That analogy is no different to changing the pointer to get back to a point in time with your data. Same analogy.
Yeah, exactly. And I wish for everyone to experience that, because it's a beautiful feeling. Gives you so much room to experiment too. It enables not just experimentation with AI, but like a more rapid iteration cycle in general for anyone. And
I agree. And actually, I think that there'll be some context there around what we'll see with agentic and agents moving forward. If you look at, I don't know if you've seen Manus. Have you seen the
Mm-mm.
agentic platform Manus? They released a very good paper recently where they talked about the fact that they'd redesigned their agentic framework several times. And one of the things that they'd done they started to use it because of the context problem we talked about earlier and the issues that comes with. They started to use a shared file system to be able to get long-term context across, agentic, session windows, if you like. And that pattern stores agentic history in JSON files that it can leverage when it needs to go back and understand. And I can see that actually being used quite a lot. I can see that the ability to have shared organizational knowledge across agentic sessions that you can go back to and check or re-leverage in a particular location on the file system, that would be great. But again, it gets back to the same point we just talked about. How great would it be to go back in time to a specific point of that agentic knowledge if something goes wrong with what you're doing with the agent?
Right. Yeah. I think it's essential for AI to move forward. I think we have to have these backstops where we can feel comfortable. Jim, I'm very curious your answer to this question because obviously, I mean, Nasuni is kind of the foundation for AI, right? It's the data. You care a lot about AI. You're very involved in this space. Why is it that you're still at Nasuni? Obviously, I would be shocked if you had not been approached by all this AI hype to be involved in other AI ventures.
Well, I think there's a few reasons for that. I mean, first of all, Nasuni bought the company that I worked on for 10 years.
Mm-hmm.
So there's a certain sense of finishing that journey. I'm also in a place where I'm still having fun and exciting, and it's interesting because obviously you would envisage that the sexiest place to be right now would be an AI company, a pure play AI company.
Right.
I would argue the antithesis to that. I would say the sexiest place to be right now from an employee perspective is to be at a data company, because ultimately AI companies, not the big ones, but some of the smaller ones, every time we see a new drop of a foundational AI platform, we see like the crushing of some of these AI companies that have had
just
to go
swaths.
it's gone. Because it's very difficult to do anything that you can't just do by interacting with AI direct. And that makes it very difficult for some of these companies. And I think the moat around some of these AI companies is becoming bigger. And when you think that the Anthropic CEO said recently that to train the next foundational model was going to be kind of $1 billion up, it kind of gives you an example of what the moat's going to be to continue to build these large foundational models. Now, that doesn't mean there won't be SLMs and small models. There will, and there's some really nice ones actually that have come out. The Google Gemma 3N is really like the 2B model, which is really a 5B model because of the way that they've compressed it. But some of those, I can see some of those discreetly being used, in departments. Great.
Yeah.
But I think that the bigger AI companies will be whittled down because it's going to be so expensive to continue to keep that going. But the data companies, like if you look at what Elon Musk said recently, he said that all of the data that you can consume to train AI is gone publicly. There is none left. We've used it all. So
which is insane.
it is. So whether that's hyperbole or not, I don't know.
Yeah, right.
But if you believe that's true, then that means that you've got two choices. You've got synthetic data,
Right.
or you've got some of this domain data that resides inside of the data companies and the customers. And I think it's exciting to work at a data company. So in answer to your question, why am I still here? It's probably one of the most exciting places to be, when you're in the age of AI. It's to be at a data company.
Totally.
No, I like that answer, especially because you touched on that some of these big players are going to go start getting whittled down. And fundamentally, I would not want to be, a Noose Research or a Mistral or even like Anthropic. I think might be in trouble because they're in a spending war against Google, and that's the exact kind of war that Google's built to win. And fundamentally, what it comes down to is Google has all that data too, right? Like they're more than just the AI, just the model training. They have so much data already.
They do. Although I saw a recent statistic today that said that Claude actually, released some new investor data, and it values them really highly. I actually think that Anthropic with Claude, obviously Musk's Grok, OpenAI, and probably Google, outside of what we see coming out of China, obviously, which is disruptive. They're probably obviously the top foundational models. I do think there's room for, people like Mistral in the market. And I think there is because some of the European countries are gravitating towards having regional AI. So I think you will see this. And some of that is because of how the data has been held and what you can do with it and what's going in and the legislation that they're putting up, right? The EU AI Data Act, it's kind of forcing you down a route that if you're, residing in those countries, you might well end up putting your data into a more regional-based AI. Actually, if you look at AI, Trump's recent AI action plan, one of the things he talked about in that was needing to be able to, if your company's working with federal contracts, needing to be able to prove that there's no bias in how you've used AI with a federal contract. Now, if you think about that, anybody who knows anything about AI knows that bias actually is inherent in every foundational model because it's been trained on articles and documents, that have been created by people who have inherent bias by default. So you might even end up with, I don't know, maybe models that are, being trained specifically that you have to use if you're working on federal contracts in the future. That wouldn't be beyond, the pale. I think there's enough room, particularly for some of the smaller vendors, particularly when you start to see some of the chips that are going to come out that are going to compete with NVIDIA, that will mean that potentially some of these models will run reasonably well on chips that don't require GPUs. You can kind of see how somebody like Jacob, who may not want some of that data to go onto any public cloud, even if it's in, a tenant, how he might use a small model, to do various things for the finance department, for example.
Yeah, right. Yeah, you touched on something really interesting there towards the end where you said all data has biases, which is interesting. One, because it's true, but two, there are organizations that try to purge data of biases, which to me has always been a funny idea because they're humans trying to purge data of biases, but they're determining what's a bias with biases. It's like this loop.
by default, it's not an easy thing to do because it's this all one person's bias is another person's etc.
Yeah.
So
exactly.
I think what was if you dig deep into some of that federal that federal action plan, I think what it going all the way back to the very beginning, and I think round tripping around talking about data governance, etc. I think one of the things that it will force vendors to do who are dealing with certain contracts is, to document, what LLM they're using, document, what steps they've taken to try and avoid bias, document the prompts that they put in, as part of what they did for the contract, and have much more solid governance around the whole end-to-end process. And if you look at what's come out of Anthropic recently, you might have seen it, the ability to kind of look underneath the hood and see how the neurons fired to get to the, how did the, not just the chain of thought that you see when it's going through its thinking process, but kind of behind the curtain, how did the LLM kind of get to make that decision, and actually track it in real time to see. So I can see some of those types of things perhaps, becoming much more formalized and being leveraged, where you have to document end to end how AI was used for this, very transparent, if you like, interaction that you have with it.
Which really opens up a whole market. I mean, my background is in auditing. I was at KPMG, did auditing, and hearing you talk about that, I'm like, oh, that's a huge opportunity market for AI auditors, where you have to have the technical knowledge, but you also need to be able to interface. You need the technical side, but also the soft side of understanding the implications of what the LLM is doing and the downstream effects. And I don't know what that'll look like, if it would look like a financial statement audit, but it's like a chain of thought LLM audit, where you sign off on a project and you say, we have audited this LLM's output.
I think at some point auditors are going to probably, if you think about, again, back to that action plan, somebody somewhere is going to have to audit what comes back to them.
Right.
So they're going to have to do exactly what you've just described and sign it off, ultimately. And actually be interesting. We haven't touched upon it, but the one of the big things about AI is critical thinking. And actually, by default, the best critical thinkers are people who've come from a kind of corporate finance background, truthfully, because they're trained to think that way. And and I'm not talking about context engineering or prompt engineering. That's really something different. Critical thinking is just a way of thinking to be able to ask the question, the right way to get the right answer. And it's the difference between doing something like, tell me what extra feature I should add to X product to get some more money, to tell me what feature I should add to my product that will have the lowest amount of effort, generate the highest amount of ROI, and please take into account these competitors who may have done something similar, so that we, something way more detailed. And not everyone can do that. Not every employee can do that. And I think what will be interesting over the coming times will be, how are we going to figure out which employees can do that we want to hire, and those who you can't teach that in some ways. It's you'll be hiring people not just for their skills, you'll be hiring people for their skills and how they can interact with the AI you've had inside your organization. And I don't think that's too far away, to be honest. I think people will start to get assessment tests,
Yeah, it might even be here in some industries. Yeah. I mean, what would you say, Jim, you would look for if we set aside the engineering, the technical coding, things like that? What would you say? You said critical thinking. Is there anything else you would say is crucial to be able to effectively use and apply AI on an individual basis?
Obviously, critical thinking is the number one. I think the number two is to understand some prompt engineering. The difference between, let's take, for example, one of you two going to apply for a job that requires AI, and let's take your average 45 to 50-year-old who might be going for the same job. The chances are that going through the door, you two probably can demonstrably show whoever's on the other end of that interview how and what you've done with AI tools before, and what those AI tools are, and which they are, which you favor, and why you favor them, and what experience you've got in them. I think that might be harder for somebody who's going to be older. And I think that gap is going to be pretty wide for people coming out of college right now. Think about somebody coming out of college. Somebody coming out of college today has probably used all sorts of AI on their way through their journey to get qualified.
Right, whether or not they were supposed to.
Whether they were supposed to or not, but they'll have gained the skill sets in that. Now imagine when they're choosing where to work. They're going to make some choices on where to work dependent on not only the company, but also the technology that the company has within it, and the feel that they get through the interview, not just the assessment that's going on the other end, because they'll want to know that they can leverage, their skill sets. And actually, it takes me to a little anecdote. I often get because of my title inside of Nasuni, people just fling emails at me and say, "Oh, I'm looking for a job," or "I need this." And I saw one, recently that said, "I'm a developer and I'm just about to finish, college, and I'd like to have a development job in AI. However, if you don't let me use AI during the interview, you will only see 60% of what I can do. And I thought that was kind of interesting because I think that's probably where those types of things are going.
Yeah. It's definitely enhancing. That's the way I view AI currently. Is it's a ability enhancer.
Yeah, there was, recently Aaron Levy from Box, wrote something on LinkedIn that said he can use AI like 20 times a day to go away and, check X, Y, and Z and do a deep research on it so that it's all there and ready for them when they, go and debate it in a meeting. Something that obviously you couldn't do even probably 6 months ago.
Right. Yeah, 100%.
And I think that Jake and I talk about this all the time. It's pretty crucial to start talking about this stuff because there's a lot of people who don't realize how far it's come already. There's a lot of people, for example, who, as far as like image generation goes, like they're still stuck on the idea that AI can't do hands. And, we're well past that. Like, not only can AI do hands, but at the same time, it can, go do some financial auditing for you. And it's the same model doing both.
Yeah, I mean, that's been the big change. And I think recently, and we saw that with OpenAI, I think the ability to not have separate models, one for image, one for voice, one for text, and to have them in the same neural net in the background so that, you've got access across the entire modality. That's had a huge change on the quality of what you get at the other end. Even you look at OpenAI could not write text inside of an image to save its life.
Right. Yeah.
And now I would say like it's high 90 percentile gets it right every single time.
Yeah, which is very recent. That's like a very recent development.
Within the last 8 weeks.
Yeah.
So I'd be interested. How at Nasuni, are you guys leveraging multimodality for any data ingestion or processes yet?
Yeah, I mean we without commenting on the internal Nasuni, we do leverage AI in all sorts of different places. Mm-hmm. Obviously, we've got a marketing and creative team, and what is AI really good for those sorts of teams? Actually, it's good for ideation.
Yeah.
But the ability to like augment your thought processes, it's perfect for that. I would argue that, when you sit down and, write an article, and you've probably seen I do lots of articles for the Nasuni blog, what have you. I still think that you want to do that from the heart and you want to do that as a person. You don't want AI to write that for you. You might want AI to check it for you. Now, AI is a very good, like if you feed an article in and you ask it to check the authenticity of the article, to check the fact that you haven't accidentally plagiarized somebody, to check the fact that the quality of it is correct, to curate it, if you like. That's always a very good thing to do, and you actually, my experience is coming out the other end, it'll sometimes make some suggestions about things you've missed that can make the article better. And then you go back and you kind of, you do it, but you do it, rather than the AI doing it.
I was going to make a similar comment, which is that I find that it works really, really well as just giving you feedback, as though you were, back in school writing an essay for your teacher. You pass the rough draft to your teacher. Your teacher says this article, this paragraph sucks. Rewrite it to be more impactful, right? You're like, oh, okay, I'll go rewrite it to be more impactful. Something that I love doing with AI is if I have a sentence or a phrase that I just can't get quite right myself, I'll pass it into, ChatGPT or Claude or whoever. And I love asking it for, rephrasings of it because I usually don't like any of them, but they make me think harder about what I dislike and like about my own phrasing, what I dislike and like about the AI's rephrasing. And then, I pull the different pieces together myself.
Yep.
I totally agree. There's certainly AI-isms in terms of how they phrase things.
Yeah,
and
exactly.
They always start like, if you ask them to do something, they always start saying this, in this world of AI innovation.
Yeah.
It's always very AI-like in terms of how
it's funny, as you are more and more familiar with AI, it becomes more and more apparent something is written with AI. You're like, this is...
where they always use like everywhere, like, all the way through the...
or the ampersand.
Or the M dash that they always...
The M dash, yeah.
I love, I don't love this. I hate when I'm reading back on my own writing. I'm like, dang it. I sound like an AI sometimes. And it's stuff that I've been saying for years, right? But it's like, for whatever reason, that particular turn of phrase has made its way into AI, and now
Yeah.
I can't use it.
It's funny to say that because we have a lady in Nasuni who is, who trained as a journalist. So
Yeah.
she knows where syntactically the M dash should be used. And she's like, and I know it should be there, but I'm like, should I put it there? Because people are going to think that I've used.
I know. I like avoid the M dash now. Yeah,
I've
truly.
become a big fan of semicolons, let me tell you.
Yeah, exactly.
In this chat that we've had here, in a short space of time, we've touched a gamut of topics on
Yeah,
right across, and it just shows you how big and deep and wide the
Truly.
AI world is. Because we could have taken any of those topics. You couldn't be an expert in all of them, truthfully. To go really deep now with AI, you've
No.
kind of got to pick which pieces you really want to be deep in, and like agents are a
Yeah.
good example. If you want to get really good with it, an agent itself, I mean, it's split into such a multidiscipline. You've got model context protocol, for example. You've got all sorts of different, like agent control protocol. You've got lots of different mechanisms and frameworks to work with agents. And actually, it's kind of hard to be the expert in all of them.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. It really is so huge. When I talk to friends, family, whoever about it, I can't stress it enough that this touches everything. AI truly will change, not will, it has and will continue to change every aspect of life. I think the closest, when we've talked in the past, I think the closest I can liken it to is the internet or something like that, where it truly has impacted almost every single area of life. And that's what we're witnessing now.
Yeah, I think it's more like electricity.
I'm really fond of
yeah.
comparing it to the printing press myself.
I mean, all of those ones we've just talked about had like kind of a huge effect.
Yeah,
And
right.
The world was never the same after the internet. The world was never the same after the printing press. The world was never the same after electricity.
Yeah, and that's what we're seeing it right now.
It's true. And it's
Yeah.
starting to become democratized in certain, ways that, I mean, the next big thing, I guess, it's going to be robotics with AI. I mean, I think when you see the recent one that came out of China, the humanoid G1 that was, I think it was retailing for some crazy price, like, $12,500 or like, as soon as it started to hit those price points and become available, it's just going to be a next step up. And actually, if you looked at Jan LeCun from Meta, his view has always been, we'll only really start to see huge advancements in AI when it's completely interacting with the world around us.
I just have to say, I love Jan.
Development. Yeah, he is good. I think it's necessary for AI.
It's going to force that issue.
Yeah. Oh man, it's exciting. I can't really get my head around it, how much it's changing and how much it still has to go. Jim, as we're getting closer to the end, I wanted to make sure to ask you specifically with Nasuni, probably because I work there and I'm curious what you would say to this. How do you see Nasuni in the next 3 to 5 years implementing, involving, using AI to help shape what they're doing?
Yeah, well, a lot of that obviously comes from, I feed into our product process. So, people like Andres Rodriguez and Nick Burling, who's like kind of the SVP product, they're working really hard on some of those roadmap items. But I would say that we're not going to be a general purpose AI company for all the reasons we talked about earlier. Like all of those companies just get swept up and the moat is too big. And actually, if you look at the enterprise, I'd say that they're already fed up of vendors forcing AI models on them because they want to use their enterprise AI models that they're comfortable with within their own tenant, or they want to use private, one of the two.
Yeah.
What they don't want is this plethora of different models that they've been forced by vendors to put data into. I think one of the things that we're really focused on is how do we enable our customers to leverage AI in the best way and make it easy and simple for them to do that, best of breed AI. And there's all sorts of different ways we could think about that. First of all, we want to be truly the best data foundation for unstructured data. And to get towards that journey, you've seen us do recent things like, FileIQ and OpsIQ. And we're also looking at, how agentic can field into that. what will that mean for Nasuni? What's going to be the predefined standard for agentic we talked earlier about? That's still pretty immature. I think a lot of the enterprises, some of them are only just getting into RAG, never mind, taking a really deep dive into agents. So, and we talked about, there's several standards around that. So I think, where it makes sense and is practical, and we can make it as transparent as what we talked about with the data resilience, that's really our aim. How do we make it so easy for you to use it and to integrate with AI that actually you don't always know that it's even happening?
Yeah.
I think if we can achieve that, then we'll have achieved something that's actually pretty hard to achieve. Because even today we have customers who think what we do around kind of snapshots and moving data around as if it's magic, because it just happens. We want to have exactly that same effect with what we allow them to do with AI.
I think that's very astute, because something that I thought about a lot, and we've talked about a lot on this podcast, is just the inertia of business in general being an impediment to the adoption of AI. And it's not necessarily that people don't want to adopt it. It's not necessarily that people are scared of it, although those are some, causes behind that. It's just that businesses are big, and it's hard to shift the process of it and the flow of it, and where it's going. And so the companies that can, like you said, make it invisible but highly effective are going to deliver massive value to people.
Yeah.
Suddenly, it's not like a huge fight to adopt a bunch of new processes business side. It's just like, hey, we're switching to this new provider, and they're going to do a bunch of cool stuff for us.
As I say, most enterprises gravitated towards the hyperscalers, from an AI perspective. That means they have a tenant on AWS or on Azure or on Google, and they're leveraging an LLM within that tenant. And that's just a service. It's like popping up anything inside of those tenants. They can put it up. They know that it's bounded by the security within that tenant, and that when they tear it down, it's gone. When you talk about AI with companies like that, and the majority of the enterprise does that, what they want to know is, how do I get my data in Nasuni talking to these systems over here? Yeah. How do I do it easily so that I can get the best value?
Yep. Which really helps companies unlock. It's been this thing forever. People are like, oh, I have 3 petabytes of data, and we use 100 terabytes of it. And this, I think, is that unlock there. Hopefully, right? Like, it all of a sudden allows AI to be involved to help you use the most relevant data.
Say at a bare minimum, it probably expands another 30 petabytes.
Never forget that not everything is an AI problem. And actually, data visibility is not necessarily an AI problem. It's a search problem. Now, we're starting to think of search as being kind of semantic search, or vector search, or conversational interaction. But it's not really. It's about indexing your data, indexing the content, being able to rapidly and quickly get access to that content based on filters or facets. And, I want to know, for example, any PDF that Jacob talked about AI in the last 6 weeks, and I'll get a list of documents. You would never get that query executed on AI. AI couldn't really execute that query because just because of the way that we know that AI works in terms of how it takes its data. So don't forget data visibility. Most enterprises today, for their 2 petabytes of data, still don't have good data visibility into that.
Yeah. Right.
And actually, right the way back at the beginning, we talked about, what do you need to do with data to get to the fact that you've got a good data strategy? One of the things is to get visibility into your data sets, to know what's going to be useful for AI and what's not going to be useful for AI. And to do that, you have to be able to see into the data.
Fascinating circular problem.
Yeah, it is.
It's kind of a chicken and an egg problem, but you do need to go through the steps. What you tend to see today in the enterprise is people will take the data sets that they know really well, and it'll be a very small proportion of those 2 petabytes we talked about, and they'll implement something small, like an internal or external facing chatbot. But ultimately, over time, to get real good operational insights into their data sets, they're going to have to tackle data governance, data lifecycle, curation, visibility, all of that stuff. They'll have to do that across the data set.
Yeah. There's a lot of contributing things to really have an effective data and AI strategy. Totally agree. Jim, last question for you before we wrap up. What advice would you give to the general public, someone who's not super technical, who wants to better understand AI?
I would say use it. I'm a big proponent of actually saying that you actually don't know I think you don't really know what it can do unless you start to use it, day to day. And I would say the best thing you can do to get familiar with AI is to use it. And the more you use it, the more your brain's going to start thinking, oh, I could do this with it, and I could do that with it.
Yeah.
Can I do this and can I do that? And actually, that's the best way to start to understand it. Not only what it can do for you, but where the edge cases are and what it can't do and how you got to interact with it. It's the best way.
Mm-hmm.
If you, a good guy who's been doing that for a long time is Ethan Mollick. I don't know whether you follow that guy on LinkedIn.
Yeah,
Ethan's great. But if you're on the kind of the LinkedIn platform, I would say go and follow Ethan Mollick or go to his Substack.
He's great.
I would second
that. Because he's always experimenting.
Yeah.
And he's always posting about it too.
He is.
And I love the way he makes it very easy to approach.
He does. And I would say he's a great guy to follow for that sort of stuff.
Yeah.
And he's learned, by the way, by doing exactly what we've just said. Just literally throwing everything at it and seeing what it can do and what it can do.
Yep.
Yeah, and I see people, another common complaint about AI I see is like, oh, I want AI that does my dishes and, my laundry. Don't want my AI to do my art. And I cannot stress heavily enough to people like that AI is here. It's, it's more theoretical abstract than that, right? Like, but, use it at work. You can automate the 95% of your job that's not enjoyable, and you can focus on the 5% that is, and deepen your skills.
I agree. Make AI do the mundane so that it leaves you available to think about doing the stuff that you really want to do.
Totally. Awesome. Well, Jim, thank you so much for coming on. I very much, both of us, but especially I, am very excited to see where Nasuni goes and your role as we move forward. Spencer's converted. Spread the word.
Give me a hat. I'll wear it.
No, it's coming.
All right,
Jim, we'll definitely stay in contact. Oh, actually, real quick, if anyone wants to follow you, I meant to ask this as well. If anyone wants to follow you, what's the best way for them to do that?
Yeah, they can find me. I'm kind of Jim Liddle everywhere. So they'll get me on LinkedIn as Jim Liddle. They'll get me on kind of X as Jim Liddle. They'll get me on Blue Sky as Jim Liddle and Mastodon. So easy to find.
That's awesome. Easy. Okay. Thanks, Jim.
Thanks. No problem. Take care. Bye.